Do you think he has the support of all Democrats? Will he be able to push this through reconciliation regardless of what the Republicans say?
Well, I think it's going to be a long, hard slog for them to try to increase taxes by this much on the American public for things that really would go way beyond what I would think is in the scope of government. There are so many liberal programs in here, very expensive. The whole green bad deal with the recyclable cafeteria trays. I think he's going to have a hard time doing it, and it's not going to happen quickly.
That's Wyoming Senator John Barrasso on President Biden's spending plans and challenges they face in Congress. A nearly $1 trillion infrastructure deal struck by a bipartisan group of senators has some potential, but Democrats also want to include a lot of items from a $715 billion transportation and water infrastructure bill passed by the House last week. We're back with Kansas Republican Senator Roger Marshall. Senator, are they going to be able to pass this through reconciliation? I mean, how do they justify all these numbers? Because they keep adding the trillions upon trillions.
Yeah, Jason, first of all, you better grab your wallet because Joe Biden's administration wants in that wallet of yours, wants you to write big checks to them. But look, I think they've spent most of their political capital on this. You know, a saying my dad taught me, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And the Biden White House has now fooled us 3 times. And they threw a bunch of senators under the bus, including Democrat senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. You know, Joe gets most of the ink, but Kirsten's one of the sharpest people I've met in a long time. She wants to be known as a maverick in that John McCain model. She's been able just to balance. I've seen her take notes, take some conversations with 4 or 5 senators at a time, and then I would speak to her about a deep health care issue, and she'd be able to recite the whole thing back to it. So I don't think Kirsten and Joe and the moderates in that party are going to be happy about the way they got through under the bus here, and they're not going to be happy about raising your taxes.
Senator, candidly, one of my concerns is Republicans seem to worry about the debt and deficit, but only when they're in the minority. So if you look back over the last 10 years, when it was Obama Biden, if you look at the spending money and the base budget, that number is really up nearly more than 50%. This is the domestic base spending, doesn't include any of the other stimulus and all the other things. That's the 10-year number. And then if you look at the debt, it's basically doubled in that 10-year period. And look, Republicans had control for some of those years. And the concern is we talk about how much more we're going to spend. But, Senator, when are we going to actually have a discussion about what we're going to cut and curb back?
Yeah, well, Jason, certainly as long as Democrats control the White House and control the House and the Senate, that conversation's not going to happen. They've already borrowed, $2 trillion this year, and they want to borrow another $6 trillion. So when I came to D.C. 4 years ago, I thought we had a plan. Much like turning around a business that's upside down, the first thing we had to do was grow the business. So we cut taxes. Despite cutting taxes, we actually grew revenue for the federal government. And then you have to start dialing things down. And where are you going to pick and choose? I've yet to have anybody call me up and say, hey, I want to cut my government subsidy. It's going to be a tough conversation to have. This is the problem that keeps me up late at night. And whether you want a strong military, strong schools, strong roads and bridges, this future of the balanced budget is what's going to impact it more than anything else. So I agree completely, but it's a tough political conversation to have. I think it'll take a second-term president with a lot of confidence.
Well, Senator, I think you're right. When you actually cut taxes, the revenue to the Treasury went up. But if you don't couple that with cutting spending, then you continue to exacerbate the problem. And Americans are going to feel things here real soon. They're also feeling it at the gas pump, where price of gas is basically $1 higher than it was a year ago. But, Senator, I wish you nothing but the best this Independence Day. I hope you, your family, and the good people of Kansas have an opportunity to celebrate like the rest of America, because you know what? This is still the greatest country on the face of the planet. But we got to figure this one out.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be with you. Happy Independence Day to you, your family, and all your listeners.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Senator, appreciate your time. All right, President Biden says he won't tolerate a nuclear Iran as the UN and European Union push Washington and Tehran to get the 2015 nuclear deal back on track. But should we actually do that? The United States and Iran are showing no signs of movement towards a nuclear agreement despite several rounds of talks. The Biden administration says Iran is in violation of the 2015 nuclear deal and is calling on Tehran to stop enriching nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, Iran is criticizing sanctions put in place when President Trump withdrew from the agreement. Dan Hoffman is a former CIA station chief and Fox News contributor. He's here to weigh in. Dan, thank you. First of all, thank you for your service to our nation. Really do appreciate that, particularly on this 4th of July weekend. But I want to get your perspective on that and this Iran nuclear deal and what you're seeing is happening right now.
Thank you. Happy 4th of July to you and to all the viewers. Iran wants us to get back into that very flawed JCPOA deal, which even Democrats did not support. That's why it never became a treaty. Senator Chuck Schumer was vociferously against it because of the nuclear sunset clauses, because it never addressed Iran's ballistic missile program, as well as Iran's state sponsorship of terrorism. Iran wants us to eliminate all the sanctions, which eliminates the incentive for them to come back and negotiate. The Biden administration says they want to build on that nuclear deal with a quote-unquote longer and stronger deal that deals with the flaws of JCPOA. I just don't see that happening. I think that we are at a crossroads here, and there's no signs this deal is going to be made.
Yeah, what would be the incentive for the United States to get rid of the sanctions? Why would we even consider that?
Well, I think we do want to put a hold on Iran's nuclear program, and if Iran were willing to agree to a better deal without those sunset clauses, with inspections. But that's a very difficult thing to do. And remember that Iran has concealed elements of their nuclear program, some of which Israel uncovered, some of which we learned in 2009 that Iran had an enrichment facility at Fordo, which they never declared. So we're in a mistrust and verify kind of situation with Iran. And remember that two of the countries negotiating on our behalf right now for this new deal are China and Russia, two countries that really don't have our best interests at heart.
Now, Dan, I also want to get your impact or your perspective on what was going on the Syrian border, because rockets have been flying and, there have been some attacks, and I want to get your perspective on that.
So when the Trump administration launched that lethal strike against Iranian Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani, we established escalation dominance over Iran. And what we're seeing right now is that doesn't transfer to the new Biden administration. We're seeing Iran testing us by using their proxy militias to launch attacks on our troops in Dar ez-Zor in Syria. Iran wants us out of the region, and that's why they're doing this. And we've gone back now to being in a position where we really need to establish this escalation dominance. And the Biden administration responded with a proportional kinetic strike, which killed reportedly 4 proxy militia members. But at the same time, I don't think that this is the end. I think we're going to continue to see these tit-for-tat attacks again until we establish some sort of a dominant position in this relationship with Iran. And that has to happen concurrently with whatever diplomatic negotiations are taking place. If we're not strong against Iran, there will be no opportunity for diplomacy.
Yeah, and this is also one of the byproducts of a rising fuel prices. The more fuel costs, the more energy costs. Guess what? That money goes into the coffers there in Iran, and they're able to fuel some of these. But I want to move on, Dan. I want to really talk about China here for a moment, because one of the concerns we just expressed with the senator is that with so much debt, second only to Japan, China holds more than $1 trillion of U.S. debt. We lean on them to actually purchase our debt. What do you see are the implications of that? What is the impact in the United States?
Well, I think economists have been looking at this for a while, and I don't know that there's any concern that China would seek to weaponize the debt holdings. If they were to sell off U.S. dollars, then it would drop the value of the dollar and increase the value of their currency, making exports more difficult for China. But I just think the debt in and of itself is a great national security threat for us. We need some fiscal sanity in Washington. This massive national debt runs the risk of causing inflationary pressure, and it also constrains us diplomatically, militarily, all the things that we need to do with our budget, not to mention deal with with whatever crisis we have to deal with at home, domestic crisis, infrastructure, and other things. The debt is constraining us massively, and we need to deal with that.
Yeah, the interest on the debt alone, we're spending about $1.5 billion per day. That's just an interest payment. We don't get anything for that other than paying off an interest where rates are near zero. But Dan, I got to shift again to another part of the world and talk a little bit about Afghanistan, because I know you've been deeply concerned about our withdrawal from Afghanistan, and particularly what's going on the Bagram Air Force Base, because as soon as we scuttle, as soon as we pull out, some bad things happen.
Yeah, it's already been looted, and it was such a key strategic location. I've been there, and it's a place from which we conducted a lot of aerial reconnaissance in Afghanistan and over in other parts of that region. Look, if there's one thing we learned from 9/11, it's that terrorists take advantage of ungoverned space to plot and plan attacks against us. And if we don't have a military capability, a finishing capability, and intelligence assets in place to detect and then preempt those threats, they will be visited on our shores. And I'm concerned that we're pulling out of Afghanistan precipitously. We're still planning on providing $4 billion in security assistance to the Afghan government without any oversight, without actually being there. I think that if we'd kept Bagram open with 2,500, 3,000 troops, we would have retained a counterterrorism capability that we still sorely need. The Taliban is not holding up to their side of the Doha Agreement by breaking with al-Qaeda. They're allowing al-Qaeda to homestead on their territory. And al-Qaeda and ISIS continue to present a threat to us in that region. So, listen, I've served in those places, and I can tell you that we were all honored to be there, especially on days like this. I served many times on a July 4th in a war zone, and we were honored to be there serving our country. And I think we need our folks out there on the front lines like never before. And it's a shame that, again, that we're, I think, repeating the same mistake the Obama administration made in 2011 when we removed our troops from Iraq, and we saw what happened there with the growth of ISIS and the caliphate.
Well, Dan, let me take this opportunity, particularly being July 4th, to thank all those men and women. It's a good segue. I know your heart goes out to those people who are overseas serving, but to the men, women, and also the families that are at home this 4th of July, I hope they know how much the American people love and care for them and appreciate their service, particularly when they're gone in a way on a great holiday and a celebration like Independence Day. Former CIA Station Chief Dan Hoffman, thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
All right, the Supreme Court just upheld Arizona's voter fraud protection laws. That ruling is expected to have national implications. A Fox News alert, Pope Francis is scheduled to undergo surgery in Rome soon. The Vatican says it is a restriction of the large intestine. This comes hours after he cheerfully greeted the public in St. Peter's Square today. The 84-year-old asked the people to, quote, pray for the Pope in a special way, end quote. No date has been set for the surgery yet. Reaction now to Thursday's Supreme Court ruling on an election fraud case brought by the Democrat National Committee. The justices upheld Arizona's voting rules restricting ballot harvesting and the submission of ballots outside of one's home precinct. Justice Alito, writing in the majority opinion, having to identify one's own polling place and then travel there does not exceed the usual burdens of voting. On the contrary, these tasks are quintessential examples of the usual burdens of voting. Critics of the Supreme Court's decision fear it could set a dangerous precedent. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on Friday.
It's just a reminder of how important it is to move forward on federal legislation, how important it is to, and urgent it is, that Congress restore the Voting Rights Act. And it's a reminder of what the stakes are here, which is that our democracy is on the line.
Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich, a Republican, he joins us now. He's been right in the middle of this fight. And Mr. Attorney General, I got to tell you, I want you to explain to people what ballot harvesting is, because Democrats took a position in California that they were in favor of it, but in North Carolina, they were opposed to it. Now they go to court and they've lost, in addition to the voting, but making sure that you vote in your own precinct.
Yeah, Jason, thank you for having me on July 4th. Happy birthday, America. And in a nutshell, this case was really about, do states have the ability to enact common sense election integrity measures? So ballot harvesting involves the practice where you have either candidates or political parties that go out and try to collect votes, sometimes put pressure on vulnerable populations to vote a certain way. And Arizona, like a lot of other states, has limitations on that. And so the Democratic National Committee sued. We fought. I successfully argued that case myself at the U.S. Supreme Court, and we won. And what's really important for all the viewers to recognize, Jason, is the hypocrisy of the left and even the Biden administration. The Biden administration literally filed a brief saying that they thought these laws were consistent with the Voting Rights Act. And now they're going around bashing them and saying how terrible things are. We know that states like Nevada have similar restrictions, and yet the DNC isn't suing Nevada. And so there's this logical inconsistency. And I remind folks that no less than Jimmy Carter co-chaired a commission that said one of the greatest threats to election integrity was third-party holding ballots and collecting ballots. So this shouldn't be a partisan issue, but for political gain, and I think to try to gin up support for S1 and HR1, they're trying to make this some sort of racial issue, or they're trying to set this narrative that somehow this is disenfranchising voters, and it's not.
Yeah, the Democrats would have you believe that our democracy is going to fail and our country is going to fall apart if this isn't in place. Look at what these two congressmen had to actually say about this. Congressman Presley, in tweets that they put out, if we put up that graphic, I got to tell you, today's SCOTUS decision is yet another attack on our voting rights. Congress must act, abolish the Jim Crow filibuster, pass the For the People Act, pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, expand the court, that's how they want to tackle this, is change the court, and save our democracy. And again, another congressman, Congressman Jones, look at what he tweeted out, because I got to tell you, he wrote, today the Supreme Court once again gutted the Voting Rights Act. If we don't expand the court soon, we will no longer have a democracy to protect. What are we waiting for? Their solution, Mr. Attorney General, is to actually just change the court. They're not attacking the ruling per se. They're just saying, hey, we got to have liberals in there. Otherwise, our democracy will not survive.
Shame on the left's attack on an independent judiciary. An independent judiciary is the bulwark of liberty in our country. It represents the rule of law. And every time the Democrats don't like a case, what they try to do is essentially change the rules in the middle of the game. And we know that this case was tethered in the Constitution, and we know that packing the court or changing the court is a boneheaded idea. And don't take my word for it, Jason. Boneheaded was the term that Joe Biden used on the Senate floor in the 1980s when he was talking about court packing. You know, once again, I think what this exposes is the hypocrisy of the far left and the hypocriticalness of their position. You know, we know that there are states like Arizona. We have, like I said, we have a case right now that will be argued this week on ballot curing periods. The left has challenged that, and yet Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, all these other left-wing states have very similar laws. So my question for those members of Congress or for Joe Biden is, why is it that in states with Democratic leadership, they have done absolutely nothing to change their laws that are more restrictive than places like Arizona or Georgia that provide more options? I think you know the answer is it's because it's all about scoring cheap political points, trying to nationalize our election, and packing the Supreme Court, which are one of the greatest threats to our liberty here on July 4th in at least the last 50 years.
Yeah, I think the ruling by the Supreme Court was really just common sense. But I got to move now to immigration with you while we have you, because Arizona is right in the thick of it, and you as the Attorney General are right in the middle of this fight. I want to listen to some sound now from Brandon Judd, who's the president of the National Border Patrol Council. Listen to what he had to say about what's going on at the border.
Number of people are getting away and not getting apprehended.
Well, the first thing that we have to understand is President Trump had this issue solved. If we would have stuck with those policies that were working, we wouldn't be in this situation today. This is a man-made disaster, and it's a disaster that's been made by this current administration. If we continue to let gotaways get away, we're going to continue to see the lawlessness that exists in these cities.
This really is a human tragedy that is totally avoidable in my opinion. But what are your thoughts, Mr. Attorney General?
Well, Jason, as you know, we actually have 3 ongoing cases. In fact, we just filed an appeal in one of our cases where we sued the Biden administration over its pause on deportation. So literally, there are 1.2 million people deportation orders, including people with felonies, people being released from prison that aren't being deported. So that case is on appeal. And literally, I wish the Biden administration cared more about hardworking American taxpayers than they did about root causes in Central America. Literally, just few blocks from where I'm sitting right now at Scottsdale and Shea, right near Chaparral High School, near a senior center, there is a detention center that's just been opened up in a luxury hotel. So the Biden administration is subsidizing, they have decriminalized, and they're empowering the cartels. And we've seen this huge spike in fentanyl, Jason. So this is going to affect not only Arizona, it's going to affect the entire country. And the clip you just played on Gotaways, what people should be asking themselves, we know that there are hundreds of thousands, 2 million people will be estimated across the border legally just this year. So if those people are voluntarily coming in and surrendering, going to these hotels in Scottsdale, what about the hundreds of thousands of gotaways, the people that don't want to be apprehended, that want to slip into our country? And that is a national security and a criminal justice threat. And it is a tragedy because this is so preventable. The Biden administration created this problem and they're trying to ignore it, but it's not going to go away.
Well, and even the people that were deported or were denied entry into this country are now being invited back into the country instead of going through the normal process of applying for a visa. We legally and lawfully bring in 1 million people a year into our country, but the priorities that have been given by this administration to prioritize those that are willing to break the law and break down the barriers, it's just untenable. And Mr. Attorney General, appreciate your work on this, and thank you for joining us on this important day, Independence Day here in this country. So best to you and your family.
Thanks.
All right, Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich, thank you very much. All right, tough talk from Chinese President Xi Jinping warning the West to stay out of China's affairs as he reconfirms the mission to take back Taiwan. Gordon Chang.
Are we going to see a policy changing as it relates to China from this Biden administration and stop telling people not to invest in these companies that are tied to the Chinese military, expanding their opportunity to acquire America?
Well, look, if the origins of the China virus have not woken America up yet, I don't know what will. I can say this. The main thing that we have to understand, the Chinese want to become the world's reserve currency. That's why they're now investigating and investing in crypto technology.
That was House Intelligence Committee Ranking Member Devin Nunes on the show last week, giving a warning about China's widening influence on global interests. At last Thursday's ceremony celebrating 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party, President Xi Jinping struck a menacing tone, saying, quote, "The Chinese people will never allow any foreign forces to bully, coerce, and enslave us. Whoever attempts to do that will surely break their heads on this steel Great Wall built with the blood and flesh of 1.4 billion of Chinese people." Let's bring in Gordon Chang, Senior Fellow at the Gatestone Institute, also author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War and The Coming Collapse of China. Thank you so much for joining us here. Gordon, that was a pretty menacing tone on the 100th anniversary. How did you read that? What was your perspective on what the President Xi said?
Yeah, it certainly was menacing, Jason, and talking about cracking skulls and spilling blood. Got to remember that China believes that it has the right to take territory from others. And indeed, it believes that it is should be in India. We're seeing an arc of instability because of Chinese aggression from India in the south to South Korea in the north. You know, Chinese officials are talking about taking great parts of Russia away, also parts of Tajikistan. So this is really something that we have seen before. And something else, Jason, that was what the words you said were not the worst from Xi Jinping's speech. He actually talked about how the Chinese people were good at taking down the old world and building a new one. And that's a reference to Xi Jinping's thought that he should be the only ruler in the world, that basically no other country has sovereignty. China should rule everything on the planet.
So what are going to be the key metrics or factors as President Biden who's been fairly soft. I just have not heard the rhetoric. I have not seen him tackle things directly. He can't even seem to directly try to challenge him on what happened in the Wuhan labs and getting core information that we need there. So what is President Biden, what should he be doing?
Well, President Biden should be imposing the greatest costs on China right now for deliberately spreading a disease beyond its borders and killing, at last count, 604,000 Americans. Xi Jinping, they lied about the transmissibility of disease. They told the world it was not contagious when they knew it was highly contagious. And then, while locking down their own country, they pressured others to not impose travel restrictions and quarantines on arrivals from China. And it was those Chinese passengers that spread a disease that should have been confined to the central part of China to the rest of the world. So Jason, this is the first time in history that one nation has attacked all the others. And the Biden administration is not concerned at all. They are not concerned about the origins of this disease. Biden spent 2 hours on the phone with Xi Jinping in February and didn't raise the issue once. And he was only forced to order that investigation by the intelligence community when there was an uproar that he had spiked an investigation in the State Department into the origins of COVID-19.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that President Biden likes to talk about how much time he spent together with him rather than the policies that the United States plans to implement to help prevent the expansion of China and what he's going to do to protect the United States of America. Gordon Chang, stay with us. I've got many more questions. We're going to be back in just a moment. China with Gordon Chang, Senior Fellow at the Gatestone Institute. Gordon, I want to get your take. You were talking about the buildup of China, but there are tens of thousands of troops now amassing, more than we've seen in a long time, on the border there with India. What's your take on what's going on there?
Well, China committed an act of aggression last May when it sent its troops below the line of actual control into Ladakh, into Indian-controlled territory. And China right now has been skirmishing with India, but it looks like they're preparing for a bigger invasion. And it's not only in Ladakh. There are Chinese troops in India's Sikkim, and there are Chinese encroachments into the independent countries of Nepal and Bhutan. So all across the Himalayas, China is trying to take away territory from neighbors.
Does China perceive that Biden is just weak? Because one of the concerns is, according to intelligence reports that we've seen, some public reporting, China has now 100 more nuclear silos that they've been building up. I mean, it's always concerning when they're doing that, right, Gordon?
Well, of course, because what we have right now are 145 more holes in the ground. They plan to put in, I believe, the DF-41 missile. Each DF-41 has 10 warheads. That is basically the number of warheads that the U.S. is permitted in total under our arms control agreements with Russia. Now, China, of course, has nukes on submarines. It has land-based mobile missiles. It has air-launched missiles. So China could very well end up with a larger nuke arsenal than the United States. And then, of course, there's Russia, and China and Russia cooperate. So in a conflict, we could find ourselves with an inadequate nuclear deterrent.
Again, do we think that this is because they perceive Biden as weak and won't do anything? Or was this part of the natural trajectory anyway?
Well, I think it's both, but they do perceive that they can push the United States around, which is one of the reasons why there was that harsh rhetoric in Xi Jinping's speech on Thursday, because they don't think that the United States will do anything. And we have seen this in a number of different things that China has done since the Biden team took over. So, yes, we've got to be concerned that Biden will not be able to deter the Chinese. So this is going to be a problem going forward until there is some confrontation. And that is going to be exceedingly dangerous. When you show strength like we've had in prior administrations, the Chinese leave us alone. When we show that we are weak, and this should just be common sense, but apparently many people in Washington don't understand it. But when you show weakness, they actually engage in extremely provocative behavior.
Yeah, it's amazing how that Ronald Reagan adage of peace through strength is just more true today than ever. Gordon Chang, thank you. Appreciate you joining us. Well, that
Happy
does
4th.
it for Sunday Morning Futures this Sunday, Independence Day. I'm Jason Chaffetz, in for Maria Bartiromo. I do hope you have a chance to check out my podcast. It's called Jason in the House. Anywhere you're at podcast